Some Ford engines don't just last, they survive. I've seen the old 300 inline six roll into my shop with no oil and still fire up like it wanted another round. I'm RJ. I've spent more than 20 years working on everything from worn-out Rangers to heavy-duty F-250s, and a few engines that defy what most people expect. I'm talking 800,000-mile survivors, like the 4.6-liter V8 and the 7.3 PowerStroke. Today, I'm sharing the Ford engines that can run forever when they're cared for the right way. If you're looking for a Ford engine that punches above its displacement, the 3.5 EcoBoost V6 delivers big time. This 3.5-liter twin-turbo V6 generates power and torque on par with a naturally aspirated 6.0-liter V8. Even in an F-150, you get plenty of get-up-and-go power without the thirst of a big V8. What makes the 3.6 EcoBoost stand out is that, when looked after, it gives a balance of decent fuel economy, strong performance, and the power that many people want in a truck without forcing you into a full-size, gas-guzzling V8. I've seen customers who've crossed 200,000 miles without any repairs. Many other engines have also crossed that line, although they have had to make a few repairs and focus on maintenance. Expect that you might have to fix a leaky valve cover or replace spark plugs more often than a non-turbo V6. While the replacement interval is similar, the consequences of worn plugs are much more severe in a turbocharged engine, often causing misfires under boost. Another customer said that their engine has been a champ, other than having a leaking exhaust manifold. That said, the 3.5 EcoBoost isn't bulletproof. Early generation versions, especially those from pre-2017, are prone to carbon buildup on intake valves because the engine uses direct injection. Over time, small oil or combustion byproducts stick to the valves, causing rough idle, misfires, or loss of power. Another weakness of the 3.5-liter engine is the turbo and exhaust manifold system. Constant heating and cooling cycles stress the exhaust manifold studs. If they break, you get leaks and misfires. And while this is often manageable, it's pretty expensive to repair if you neglect it. You must also avoid neglecting the water pump. On many versions, it's driven by the timing chain and located inside the engine. A failure can leak coolant into the oil, causing catastrophic engine failure. So the 3.5 EcoBoost V6 is one of Ford's best-performing, most practical engines if you maintain it right. But that's not all Ford has to offer. I also consider the 7.3-liter PowerStroke V8 to be a pretty reliable engine from Ford, and it would probably last over 800,000 miles if you maintain it right. The 7.3 PowerStroke is one of those engines that builds real respect in a shop. It has cast iron blocks and heads that bring V8 grunt and enough torque to do real truck work without drama. In a 7.3-liter PowerStroke V8, common in trucks like the Ford F-250, F-350, and other heavy-duty Super Duty rigs from roughly 1994 to 2003, it puts out around 275 horsepower and 525 pound-feet of torque with the later intercooled versions, 1999 to 2003. It has enough juice to tow, haul, or just keep rolling long after other engines give up. From my years of working on diesels, what stands out is its simplicity and ruggedness. It doesn't rely on overly complex electronics or fragile emissions hardware. Some of my customers have been using these engines for over 300,000 miles with only routine maintenance. This engine is a favorite because of how reliable and simple it is to take care of. That said, the 7.3 isn't bulletproof. One of the most common trouble spots is the camshaft position sensor. When it goes bad, the engine might not start or could stall while driving. Also, the fuel filter housing can crack or leak. The turbocharger up pipe might leak, causing loss of boost, and the wiring harness under the valve cover can degrade. So, if you pick a well-maintained 7.3 PowerStroke, treat it right and stay ahead of the maintenance routine. Another one of the best Ford engines that I love for its long-lasting use is the 5.0-liter Coyote V8. It's a modern Ford mainstay that you can find in trucks like the Ford F-150 and performance cars like the Ford Mustang. Built with a strong aluminum block, it has a forged steel crankshaft, 4-bolt main caps, and piston cooling jets. This delivers solid power, smooth V8 rumble, and respectable reliability when treated right. Variable valve timing and tuned heads give the Coyote a broad torque curve. It's good for highway hauling, towing, or daily driving, with plenty of grunt without needing turbochargers. This also means fewer parts can go wrong compared to forced induction engines. Many of my customers who use the 5.0-liter Coyote V8 have been using them for hundreds of thousands of miles with just normal upkeep. Many of these engines surpass 200,000 miles with just basic maintenance. But let's be honest, this engine isn't perfect. Early generation Coyote engines had a known issue with 2-piece exhaust valves that could fail, leading to catastrophic engine damage. This was a rare but serious issue addressed in later models. Also, the timing chain tensioners are known weak spots, and if you skip oil changes or use low-quality oil, engine components can wear out. If you stay on top of oil and filter changes, keep coolant and intake systems clean, and don't ignore minor rattles or leaks, the 5.0 Coyote is one of the most practical, long-lasting V8s Ford makes. If you don't mind an old engine, the 5.0-liter EFI high-output V8 is one of the best engines. This brought muscle back to Ford in the 1980s and 90s. It's a 5.0-liter naturally aspirated V8, but reworked with better heads, a revised firing order, and electronic fuel injection. With EFI and some internal upgrades, the high-output version put out roughly 185 to 225 horsepower and somewhere around 270 to 300 pound-feet of torque depending on application. That made it a sweet spot engine with enough V8 grunt for street, towing, or general driving. I've seen early generation Mustangs, sedans, and even some trucks with this 5.0 HO still running smoothly decades later. Some of my customers have even claimed up to 1 million miles with this engine, though these are exceptional, often highway mile cases that prove its potential. But you have to pay attention to some of the common issues. With the 5.0 EFI HO, some weak spots tend to be oil leaks from aging gaskets or seals, and general oil consumption over time. On older vehicles, if the cooling system, oil seals, gaskets, or maintenance schedule are ignored, especially under hard use, you can end up with burnt valves, a blown head gasket, or even block problems. Spending a few $100s a year on basic upkeep can save you thousands down the line. So the 5.0-liter EFI high-output V8 engine is a classic Ford with a strong balance of power, durability, and simple maintenance. If you're finding this helpful, hit that like button. It helps the channel a lot. I also recommend the 300 i6 engine, a humble, old-school workhorse that would last for hundreds of thousands of miles if you take good care of it. It has a long cast-iron block and head, simple overhead valve pushrod design, and a straight-six layout that delivers torque low in the rev range. In its stock form, many versions of this engine produce about 100 to 150 horsepower, depending on the year and the carburetor or EFI setup, while the torque figures are in the ballpark of 220 to 260 pound-feet at low RPMs. But here's the thing. You don't need high revs or fancy turbochargers to get work done. I've seen old F-150s, farm trucks, and work rigs ride around for decades simply because of this steady, low-end grunt. One of the reasons why I like this Ford engine is its simplicity. It doesn't have any fancy electronics, a turbo, or complex emissions gear, making it easy to maintain. I've worked on trucks where the 300 still ran strong at 300,000 to 400,000 miles, even when the rest of the rig was worn out. One guy even used the engine for over 475,000 miles with no rebuild. That said, the 300 has its weak spots. Common trouble spots in the engine include oil leaks, rear main seal leaks or pan gasket issues, and sometimes cracked exhaust manifolds from repeated heating cycles. The older models can run rough or have poor fuel economy, and if the fuel system or vacuum lines degrade, the performance and reliability will suffer. If you're using this engine, keep in mind that revving it high doesn't do it any favors. It breathes poorly at high RPM, so it's best suited for hauling, towing, or steady cruising, and definitely not sporty driving. Another old-school engine that you can consider inserting in your Ford is the 390 FE V8. This is part of Ford's FE V8 family, built from the early 1960s into the mid-1970s. It displaced roughly 390 cubic inches and was used in full-size Fords, trucks, and performance cars of the era. The block is cast iron, rugged with a strong bottom end that, if you maintain it right, it gives serious durability. On the street and in work rigs, I've seen these engines hang in there when the others give up. I've seen dozens of 390s that have reached well past 250,000 miles untouched. With the torque character, you feel it pulling low and steady, making it good in trucks and heavy cars. To take care of this engine, you'll be doing simple stuff compared to modern engines. It uses a basic carburetor setup, which means there are fewer sensors and more brute strength. On a 390, the internals are strong for what they are. Many owners say the bottom end is bulletproof. Because it's an older design, parts availability might be a bit more limited or expensive compared to more common small block engines. After all, you'll be dealing with a motor that's been out of production since 1976. But there's no escaping maintenance. If cooling or oil maintenance is neglected, you'll see leaks, worn valve guides, push rod or tappet wear, and carburetor vacuum issues. One of my customers complained that their 390 idled rough because of a vacuum or carb flange leak. Also, if you modify the engine heavily, you can expose its limits. Some users caution that the 390 block shouldn't be pushed wildly above 450 to 500 horsepower because of crank or bearing stress on the stock rotating assembly. If you want a heavy-duty workhorse engine, consider the 6.7-liter PowerStroke diesel as one of Ford's top engines. It's used in the Super Duty trucks like the F250, F350, and up. From about 2011 onward, it features a compacted graphite iron block for strength, reverse flow heads where the exhaust sits inside the engine valley, and a high-pressure common rail fuel system. It's a single-turbo engine that makes big torque for towing, hauling, and real-world hard work. What makes it stand out is the sheer grunt and the fact that it's built to last for a long time. Many of my customers have used it for over 300,000 miles with only routine care. The 6.7 gives you modern diesel efficiency and power in a package that, if maintained right, can outlast many comparable gas engines under heavy-duty use. The customers who focus on filter changes and oil and fuel system care have never had to deal with major stop-in-the-shop issues. Early versions of the engine, roughly 2011 and 2012, have had issues with turbo bearing failures, exhaust valve cracking, and fuel system problems. One common fault I've seen in the shop is the cold side charge pipe, which might crack or fail under boost, causing loss of power and big repair bills. Without proper maintenance, you might also deal with fuel system failures, which can cost over $10,000 to repair. The 5.2-liter Predator V8 is a beast of an engine. It's a supercharged 5.2-liter V8 developed by Ford Performance, used in models like the Ford Mustang Shelby GT500 and expected in other high-performance Ford vehicles. It builds on Ford's 5.2-liter line, but adds a twin-screw supercharger, high-end internals, and performance tuning. It produces well north of 700 horsepower in factory form, and some of my customers have tuned it to push past 760 horsepower. What makes it stand out is that it's a high-revving, potent V8 that's designed for high-performance driving and serious street or track use. You don't see many engines like this in the regular world. It has premium internals, forced induction, and the expectation of high output, which is why maintenance is pretty important. So, while the engine is incredibly capable, it demands top-tier care. You also have to consider the downsides to the engine. Because this is a performance engine with supercharging, hotter temperatures, and higher cylinder pressures, it has more weak spots compared to a standard V8. Some of my customers have also ended up with timing chain issues or secondary tensioner activation problems. If you skip oil changes, use mediocre fuel, or ignore overheating, you're asking for a pricey repair. With an engine like this, a neglected maintenance routine can cause supercharger failure, bearing wear, or head gasket issues under boost. When Ford rolled out the 7.3-liter Godzilla in 2020, they weren't just building another V8. They were aiming for a workhorse with old-school muscle but modern components. The block is cast iron, the heads are aluminum, and the bore and stroke give about 445 cubic inches. Compression is also about 10.5 to 1. The engine produces a stock power output of around 430 horsepower and 475 pound-feet of torque. What stands out to me with all my experience is the simplicity of the design. It has a pushrod OHV layout rather than overhead cams, with variable cam timing notwithstanding. The engine was built for heavy-duty truck use, and many of my customers have used it for tens of thousands of hard towing miles with no problems. And it's proving to be a very durable, modern V8. Another reason why I like this engine is how easy it is to access compared with many modern engines. But like any other engine, it will only last if you treat it right. Some of the common issues with this engine are oil pressure issues, lifter and valve train problems like a ticking or tapping sound under load or at idle, and ignition or wiring harness issues. But this engine is newer, so I've mostly seen them running strong well past 100,000 miles. It's a strong candidate as one of the best Ford engines out there. Another old but reliable engine that you can consider for your Ford is the 289 small block. Introduced in 1963 by Ford, it's a 289 cubic inch V8 with a bore of 4 inches and a stroke of 2.87 inches. You can choose the regular or high-PO engine options. In the high-PO version, you could see factory ratings like 271 horsepower and 312 pound-feet of torque. What makes it stand out is its strong combination of compact size, respectable power, and simple design compared with later high-tech motors. On the shop bench, I've seen them in vintage Mustangs or early F-Series trucks, and many of them are still running strong when other engines of the era have long been retired. It's almost like the engine is bulletproof. Since it's a pushrod OHV V8 with a cast iron block and heads, it's easier to service than many modern units. It's well known among the small block Ford fans for long life when maintained, but keep in mind that these engines are pretty old, so you need to stay on top of basic maintenance. When choosing this engine, you need to be careful and keep an eye out for some common faults. Some of these issues include cooling system faults, oil leaks, and overheating. On some rebuilds, you might also see problems from improper assembly or worn internals. For raw performance, you can also consider the 5.2-liter Voodoo V8. This appeared in cars like the Ford Mustang Shelby GT350, starting around 2015 to 2016. And what makes it stand out is its flat plane crank design and high rev capability. It has a redline of about 8,250 RPM, and it's more powerful than the standard 5.0-liter Coyote V8. I just love how raw and mechanical this engine is, and while it has advanced electronics for its VVT, it lacks the complexity of forced induction. Still, because it's a high-revving, performance-oriented engine, there are some things you need to watch. Some of my customers using the 2017 and 2018 models deal with excess oil consumption. Some early failures occurred too. For instance, some engines might drop a valve at very low miles. Because of the flat plane crank and the vibrations it brings, the Voodoo can be more demanding than a typical Ford V8. If you use this engine like a mild commuter and you stay on top of servicing like oil changes, checking for leaks, and using high-quality fluids, it can really shine. But if you push it hard regularly, track it without proper preparation, or skip maintenance, the risk of expensive repairs goes up pretty fast. And finally, I recommend the 5.4-liter supercharged V8 as one of the best Ford engines. It has a displacement of about 5.4 liters or roughly 330 cubic inches and was used in high-performance Ford models like the early 2000s Ford Mustang Shelby GT500 or the special edition versions of trucks like the Ford F-150 Lightning. The engine had an aluminum block with aluminum heads, a supercharger producing boost and output numbers up to about 500 horsepower and 510 pound-feet of torque. Compared to a naturally aspirated engine of the same size, the supercharger adds serious torque and horsepower. Many of my customers like this engine because it has a strong, factory-upgraded feel, and the engine sounds and behaves like a proper muscle engine instead of a wimpy commuter V8. But as a high-performance engine, you need to focus on better care. These Ford engines offer different levels of performance. but with proper maintenance, they can last as long as 800,000 miles. If you want more real advice for Ford owners, make sure to subscribe and check out my next video where I share how to make your Ford last another 200,000 miles without repairs.